Bonjour, je m'appelle Nicole. Aujourd'hui, je vais vous parler à propos de mes expériences en apprenant le Python et le français en même temps. Je voulais présenter cette conf en français, mais présenter une conf est déjà assez difficile comme ça, donc je continuerai en anglais. Aussi, si vous voulez demander des questions à la fin, s'il vous plaît, demandez-les en anglais. C'est plus facile pour moi comme ça. Mais si vous voulez venir me trouver plus tard, on peut essayer de se parler en français. Pas de problème. So that was an introduction to my French. So who am I? As you know already, my name's Nicole. And you might be able to tell from my English accent, well, my English language accent, that I'm Australian. But I live in the UK with my half French, half British husband. And we run a small web design and development agency there. And we're actually about to start work with PeopleDoc, who are one of the sponsors here at PyConFr. So I've been learning French for about 6 years, on and off. And my motivation for learning French was because I wanted to speak to the grandparents of my husband who live here in France. And for 3 of those years, I've also been learning Python. And my motivation for that was also very practical. I wanted to be able to help in the business. We had more development work coming in, so I needed to be able to help out there. And I also wanted to create an app which is for inspiring and encouraging mentorship within technical communities. So the point of me being here today is to talk to you about those 2 learning experiences and what I think the Python community can learn from the language learning community in terms of better helping new learners, beginner learners. Oh, this is not working. I can't make my slide go. No. Okay. So the first point is to celebrate late adopters. So there's a widespread perception that in order to learn a language, you must start when you're a child, or that you need to become, in order to become fluent, you must begin from childhood. Now, it's true that children have certain advantages in learning languages. So the first thing is that they have a lot more time. So someone who's my age, I'm 30, who starts at 5, even if they just do a couple of, lessons per week, they're going to have 25 years of experience by the time they get to my age, whereas I only have 6. So that they're going to be ahead of me. And the second is that we tend to give children a really easy run. So a 5-year-old that can say what I just said at the beginning of this conference is obviously going to be much more impressive than a 30-year-old being able to say that, because we think that the children can't do these kinds of things. But adults actually have advantages too. So linguistic researchers have found that under controlled conditions, adults can be better at language learners. And that's largely because adults are able to draw on existing tangential knowledge. So in my example, I already know English. There's lots of common words and concepts between English and French. So I can draw on those concepts in order to progress my French learning. So this is really good news because there's lots of people who start learning languages as adults. It's really, really common, and the adult learning community, the language learning community, is really, really big. There are blogs and there are resources specifically targeted towards adult learners. And through these, I saw a lot of people who were learning French, and I came to realize that if all these other people can learn a second language and they can speak a second language, then so can I, and I think that was a really motivating thing for me. So in the technical community, I think we also have a problem. I think there's a perception that to become a coding ninja, we must start from childhood, that you must have been born with a computer in front of you, or at least that those who start coding when they're young are always going to be in front of people who start coding a little bit later in life. And while people who have been coding for a long time do have an advantage in time, adult learners who come to learn Python have other advantages because they're bringing knowledge from other fields. So while I think it's important to encourage that Python be taught at school and at university, etc., I also think that we need to highlight the experiences of adult learners, people who are coming to Python after having careers in other things, people who are coming from different fields, and people specifically who don't have computer science degrees. So for over a year now, the Django Girls blog have been featuring a Django story. I'm there, I'm very proud to be there. And this blog highlights the achievements of women who work with Django. And of the women profiled, lots of these women started coding when they were young, and lots of them do have computer science degrees, but there's also lots of women who don't, who started in another field and then came to Python, or Django in this case, later in life. So you can see this is a bit of a word map. You can see that there's teachers, engineers, people who have been interested or have degrees in psychology and literature and business and music and all sorts of different things. And I think that specifically targeting and highlighting learners who have come from other fields after pursuing different careers is going to encourage and inspire adult learners. And I think it's also going to improve the diversity of our community as well, because it will bring in new skills and new backgrounds and new knowledge bases that will make the whole community stronger. So my second point of what the Python community can do to help new beginners that I learned from my language learning experience is to help break down motivation barriers. So my learning journey has been marked by these really intense periods of frequent activity, and then these large blocks of times when I've done not very much. And this partly had to do with the things that I was doing in my life, but it also had to do with my level of motivation. My largest learning jumps in French happened when I could start to actually talk to people and make basic sentences. During this time, it's been easy to stay motivated and keep learning because there's a reward, there's an effort-reward cycle going on. Sorry, I've lost my spot. Now, the good thing is that Python doesn't actually have this problem. I think we're doing a good job at giving new learners instant gratification, which keeps learners motivated. So, in a recent survey, this is a survey of English school children and their parents, and it revealed that 75% of primary school aged children would prefer to learn to code, and it was specifically Python, this survey, than learn to speak in French. And I think the reason for that is not because French is awful. I think it's because it's easy to start making progress when you're starting out in programming. You know, you've got all these basic programs that you can create to get motivated and stay motivated. But the bad news is that the same survey revealed that as children got older, they lost interest in learning to code. And I think that's partly because what happens is it's really exciting and they're creating things, you know, very simple programs, and then they sort of hit a barrier where it all starts to become quite hard, and it's really difficult to stay motivated in that kind of circumstances. So if I had to describe my own learning paths, this is what they'd look like, my very accurate and scientific graph. So this is French. So it starts off, and this is the motivation block. So it starts off really, really hard, and it's really hard for a long time because I can't do anything and say anything. And then as soon as I can start to say things, my learning experience it gets a lot easier, and then it's going back up at the end because at the moment I'm trying to learn conjugation, and that's not much fun. Um, and on the other hand, this is what I think my Python learning experience looks like, and I think that maybe you can identify with this. At the beginning, it's quite easy, you can get things to work, it's really exciting, and then you hit this. And for me, that was two things. It was time zones, and it was deploying my Django project. So these were the two things that I really, really struggled with, and I lost a lot of time and a lot of motivation at that point. So I think that, I did everything that you're supposed to do. I went on ISC, I asked questions, I read tutorials, I Googled things, but I couldn't really get past this block there. And what I really needed was somebody to talk to and to tell me, how time zones work and how I should be deploying my project. And that leads me to my next point, which is encouraging mentorship. So I think people are often surprised when I explain to them that I've actually never taken a formal French lesson, but as you heard before, I can kind of get by saying a few things in French. And while I can attribute that partly to some good learning resources, the main reason that I can kind of get by is because I have my husband who's also my mentor. So what did he do for me? First thing he did is he answered my difficult questions. I'm not talking about questions like translation questions. I can obviously get the answers to those online or in a book. He answered my questions about the structure and the meaning of the French language. The next thing he did was he corrected me when I was saying something wrong, which was often, and he focused particularly on my accent. And he told me what I needed to improve, and he pointed me towards resources to help me. He even bought me a Becquerel, which I've heard today is not the most popular book in France. Now, he didn't actually teach me French. I'm not going to give him the credit for teaching me French. I taught myself French. But without his help, I would have been a lot further back, or I would have given up in my learning journey. So this is my proposal. Wouldn't it be amazing if every new Python developer had someone to answer their questions, not the simple stuff that you can find by Googling, but the really, really difficult stuff that you can't understand? Someone to review their code, and someone to help develop tailored learning plans specifically for them. I'm not talking here about a teacher, I'm talking about a mentor. And as a community, I think we would benefit immensely from setting up a formal mentorship system. Not only for new developers either, I think we could have a system where everyone was mentoring someone else. So you're probably thinking, I've got enough to do keeping up with all the technology. I don't want to have another responsibility of mentoring another person. This sounds like a lot of work and I don't want to do it. But the thing about mentoring is that being a mentor is just as valuable as being mentored, because you start to learn things, and having to explain things, you start to learn things about the language that you didn't know before. And that was certainly the case with my husband mentoring me in French. He had a lot of insights into the French and English languages and their relationship between each other because he was helping me. So I've been working on a small project called Connect, and it's specifically to help facilitate mentorship. So if this is something you're interested, come and talk to me, maybe in French later, and we can talk about it together. So the next thing I want to talk about is immersing new learners. So in the language learning community, it's widely accepted the best way to learn a language is to be immersed in it. And often this is in the form of comprehensive courses where you go to France and you do 10 days of workshops and then you're immersed in the language. But sometimes it's just a matter of going to a place and speaking to people in your target language. You're probably not surprised to hear that there's lots of words in my French vocabulary that I can't remember learning, lots that I just picked up just by being sort of exposed to the language. The interesting thing is I might use a word or a phrase incorrectly for a while, and then after I'm exposed to it over and over again, I correct myself until eventually I'm saying it right in terms of meaning and almost right in terms of accent. So I think in our industry, we're uncomfortable with the notion of developers or beginner developers muddling through in the same way. We definitely don't like the idea of new developers taking code that they don't understand and using it in their projects. But when I was learning Python, I actually found the best way to learn was to copy code, put it in my project, get it to work. And then in refactoring it and reusing it, I actually started to understand what the code was doing. The problem, though, is that we write our documentation with the idea that, that understanding should always come before implementation. For this reason, our documentation often includes difficult explanation, but not very many examples. So I'd like to see, this is my call to action, I'd like to see more code samples in documentation. I'd like to be inundated, I'd like to be immersed in code examples. I'd like to see examples of where a library's been used in another real project so that I can look at that and see how other developers have used it. And I'd like to see a little change in attitude. And I think we should be giving beginners the room to implement something first and then understand it later. Because I think in reality, very few beginners are working on code bases that are critical systems. It really doesn't matter for most beginners if there's a short period between implementing something and understanding something. So this is my final point. I'm going to admit here that for out of the last 6 years, for the 5 of those years, I've been really, really shy about learning French, really embarrassed by it. I wouldn't speak to anyone in French because I was so afraid that I was going to make a mistake and look like an idiot. So this was single-handedly like the worst thing for me. It really, really held me back in terms of my learning. And in January of this year, I made a New Year's resolution, and I decided that I wasn't going to care anymore. I was going to talk to as many people in French as I could, and if they had a problem with it, it was their problem. I was going to be proud of what I'd learned and just sort of get on with it. So I decided to fake it till I make it. I became Nicole, not Nicole, and I imagined that I was French. That's my attire today. And this alone was actually proved to be the biggest improvement in my knowledge. And again, I think that we have a similar problem in the Python or the technical community. I think that there's a lot of people that are afraid to ask questions because they're scared of looking like an idiot. And they don't want to sound stupid. And I think they're afraid to ask for feedback on code or even show their code because they don't want to be given negative or unhelpful feedback. I think there's such a stigma around being a bad coder that some people are paralyzed by the idea of that label being applied to them. So I was working on my app for over a year before I actually showed anybody, pretty much for this reason. And this was really stupid because I showed it at DjangoCon this year, and everyone thought my code was good and they wanted to help me, and it really boosted my confidence and it helped me immensely. And if I had have just put that out there a year before, I would have been much further along in my learning. So I think to help people get over these things, there's 2 things we can do. I think we need to encourage new coders to make mistakes. And I think we need to make failure a celebrated part of the the Python learning process. And I think we need more experienced programmers to stand up and say, this is the time that I totally stuffed it up. And this is the time that I didn't understand what I was doing. Because if we can see other more experienced developers doing that, then beginners are going to see that failure is a natural part of the learning process. And the second thing I think we can do is give better feedback. So I think we could develop some community guidelines about how to give feedback in a way that promotes kindness over judgment. Sometimes there's nothing more shattering than putting yourself out there and getting feedback that's judgmental or given to you in a tone that's not helpful, because even if the feedback is correct, the way that you are giving that feedback can be debilitating for the person receiving it. So in conclusion, number 1 was to celebrate new learners, celebrate late adapters, break down motivational barriers, encourage mentorship, and immerse new learners, and boost confidence. And I think if we can do all of this, we're going to really help new Pythonistas on their learning journey. Thank you. Merci. Any questions? En anglais? Please. Rémi?
Oui, merci beaucoup.
De rien.
Vraiment, c'est très inspirant. Ça fait longtemps que j'ai pas vu un talk qui m'a autant motivé à être mentor. Bon, je fais un peu de Django Carots aussi, mais merci. Voilà.
D'accord, merci.
Hi. I like to say that I found your talk very inspiring as well, because I find myself in the same situation as you. I started to learn French very recently, as well as Python. And yes, like to know, when you show your learning curve, I saw that at the beginning you had a hard time to learn French. And I'd like to know if it's really, if you think that youth learn faster in case of, I don't know if you were in a French environment at that time or not, or you were?
No.
Okay.
No.
So you think that if you had in a French environment that forced you to speak, you think youth learn faster?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was what the point about immersion was. For most of the time when I was learning French, I was in Australia. So it's not like I could just pop over to France and be immersed in French language and culture. I had to go quite a way. So I think immersion is one of the most important things. And that's why I was saying giving more examples of code and immersing learners in the same way would be helpful. There's a really interesting talk by Kathy Sierra it's called, I can't remember the exact name, but it's Creating Badass Developers. And she talks a lot about immersion within a technical concept. So if you're interested in that concept, she's got 2 really good talks. That's one of them, and I'd recommend that you have a look at that.
Thank you.
I have to say, I'm a beginner since 10 years. I'm 25. I've tried a dozen of languages, and learning a language is hard. There is a lack of beginner guys. Since 10 years, I've tried many languages, and I can do the basic in a terminal. But I'd like to try graphic interfaces. And there is no guide, no help, nothing. Doing terminal is boring.
Yeah, I think this is actually the study that the example that I showed you was primary school age children, and a lot of the time primary school age children do things with, I can't remember the name of the language, but the little turtle. I can't remember the name, but they have graphical interfaces for learning how to code. And the question actually, the quote was a little bit misleading, but the question that they were asked was, would you rather learn to speak French or program a robot? And I mean, kids are going to answer, I want to program a robot, right? Because it's exciting. And I think that having more things that are going to make things a lot easier and more exciting, like you said, is really important in the early stages.
Today, I'm unable, for example, to try simple things like code the petrol consumption of my car to follow it. I have an old car and it's really expensive. And in console, it's boring. I like to have graphics, and I can do it in GTK, in Qt. There is no beginner guide. And when I searched on the web, I just found, oh, yeah, look, you can do Hello World. No, that's not I want to do.
I think you've just created a new project for yourself, creating a GUI for people in your position, maybe,
Yeah.
you know?
I love to have more experienced programmers to write, create documentation for beginners, and what seems to be advanced programming, and which is not, which is something that appears logical every day when we use our computers. We use it on a graphical interfaces, not terminal, except on Linux. But today, when you're interested in computers, the community, when you ask a question, a simple question is...
Use a terminal.
No, just Google it.
Yeah.
You don't know the answer, I will not answer your question. Google it.
I think this is coming back to one of my other points, is where if you had a mentor, you know,
it will be easier.
Yeah, because there are things that you can Google and find the answer to. But also I think the other thing is sometimes when you Google something, you get 6 different answers and you don't know which one's not the right one, but the best one. And without someone who's there to say, well, you don't want to do it that way, or you don't want to do it that way, then you don't have any guide. And I think that's what you're saying, having someone to help you.
With different versions of languages. Recently, I've tried Python, and I found a really interesting method on Learn Python the Hard Way. The guy has a method really interesting for adult beginners in C. Python, and his method is interesting, but his Python method is hardly is in Python 2. And when you try, you install, you go on Python website and download Python 3. And when you try, you got errors. Why? That's not what's the documentation saying to me. And in many languages, I found that documentation for beginners are totally outdated. No one take the time to rewrite them for beginners, because every community of developers are less. No, it's boring for us. We don't want beginners. We want to answer advanced questions. And when you look at Stack Overflow, for example, you have sometimes hundreds of answers for really specific and complex
examples. Yeah.
examples. And when a beginner is here, everyone is like, no, you're beginners, that's boring. Google it, it's easy. It's not easy when you're a beginner, just Google it with different version, some libraries. And if someone here is interested in methods, write and try to keep the writing up to date. It's really interesting to learn language, not just use software only there. It's interesting to try to create your own tool. Every tool doesn't transfer for what you need, and sometimes
Yeah.
It's been 10 years that I'm a beginner, so it's not a lack of motivation. I lived since 10 years, but today, I'm at the same point I was 10 years ago.
Mm.
And I've learned English
Mm.
in a much easier way.
Yeah. I think something I should announce that's kind of related to what you were saying is I'm involved in the redesign of PyPy. We're going to be redesigning that and relaunching PyPy at the end of this year to the start of next year. And one of the priorities that we've identified in that process is we're going to be we're writing 2 tutorials for beginners. So there's going to be one tutorial that's covering what a package is and how to install a package, for people who've never come across a package before in their life. And then another tutorial, step-by-step tutorial for how to package a package for PyPy. So that's kind of what you were saying. I mean, I know it's slightly different, but I think there are some efforts to try and make things more beginner friendly. I think it depends generally on the projects that you're looking at. I think the Django community is particularly good with their tutorial. That's how I learned Django. That was a step-by-step tutorial, but I think you're right. There are some instances where the documentation could definitely be improved for beginners. Were there any other questions? No? Okay, merci.